Do you think about your childhood often? Think about mine when the going gets rough. I think about my childhood. Strangest times.
This is a video essay about the 1976 Henry Jaglom film, Tracks. I first saw Tracks on the BBC Two series Moviedrome on the 23rd of August 1992 at 9:40 p.m, and I would like to thank the internet for making that level of detail available. For those who don't know, Moviedrome was a series of cult movies shown on BBC Two which, at that time, were introduced by Alex Cox, a British director who filled that role of big brother who was into films that I never had. He's probably best known for making Repoman and Sid Nancy, but there are a number of his films that are well worth a look, including Walker and El Patrolero, or Highway Patrolman. Back in those days, I would scour the TV listings for any film that looked like it was going to be unusual or offbeat, and Moviedrome was generally perfect for this. Tracks is no exception. Its director, Henry Jaglom, was an actor first, but he became one of the final editors on Easy Rider. There were a few re-edits of the film, and that really launched his filmmaking career. Bob Rafelson and Bert Schneider, the producers of Easy Riders and the guys who gave you Head in 1968, brought him in at the very last minute to turn a 220-minute cut into the 95-minute cut we all know and don't really watch anymore today. He maintained a love for actors throughout his career. He's really what you might call an actor-centric filmmaker, and you can tell this from Tracks. The center of the film really is the performances, and for most of the cast, that's dialogue scenes, with Dennis Hopper and a few choice others getting the chance to do dialogue-free moments. Very few cutaways of what you might call more cinematic shots. Jaglom does look like he's keeping that editorial experience at the forefront while making Tracks though. He's doing what you call shooting for the edit, getting just enough takes from just enough angles to cut everything together. Sure, occasionally it's a little functional or messy, but hey, that's what happens when it's 1976. He had also just been part of Orson Welles' The Other Side of the Wind, and although that film only happened for us recently, it would have been very fresh in his mind with that broken, fragmentary style of filmmaking back when he made Tracks. It's certainly very different from anything else he ever made. Tracks is a film about a soldier, played by Dennis Hopper, transporting the body of a fallen friend across the country for his funeral. Or maybe it's just an empty coffin with a flag on it. But that's not really what it's about. Tracks is about America coming to terms with what happened to it and what it did in Vietnam, a conflict that ended 1 year before Tracks was released. The only music in the film is World War II era songs, echoes from a conflict that was far more clear-cut to most people. World War II is what you might call a more heroic war, a more just war. Not like this Vietnam stuff, messy, protested, irrelevant to those back home. If you were coming home from World War II, people on a train might talk to you about it. They might congratulate you. Thank you for your service. But that's not what it's like to come home after Vietnam. These days, the Vietnam War is ancient history, and we've seen it presented to us in a number of different ways in movies over the years. Well, here's how Alex Cox summarized it when he introduced Tracks originally.
In the almost 20 years since the US lost its all-out Southeast Asian war, the cinematic history of US involvement in Vietnam has been rewritten at least 3 times. First by filmmakers Jaglom and Karel Reisz, who rejected the John Wayne analysis featured in Green Berets. Again by Francis Coppola and Michael Cimino, proponents of the tragic error/loss of innocence theory. And finally by the Rambo Gene Hackman school of Vietnam movies, which revert to the original John Wayne thesis of a noble enterprise betrayed by sandbaggers at home.
But, to be honest with you, little of this meant much to me back in 1992, because Tracks became one of a number of films that my mother and I used to watch on a regular basis, and really, that's what this is all about. I have always been someone who wakes up early, and I would usually have a movie on in the background on volume level 1 or 2 while I got ready to go to school. I'd spent pretty much my entire life up to that point in solo morning ventures while everyone else slept, and I'd learned how to do everything as quietly as possible so I didn't wake anyone up. In 1992, there was me, my brothers, our mum, stepfather, and a number of lodgers who lived with us, usually between 7 and 10 people in total. But suddenly, during the early 90s, my mother went through a period of unrest or insomnia or something, so she was also waking up early, and either she would join me to watch a film in the morning while getting ready for the day, or I would wake up to find her already watching one. We had a list of films in circulation at this point, and Tracks quickly became one of these films. This experience of early morning somehow sent us on a quest to find films that presented themselves as close to the experience of real life as possible, and that meant running dangerously close to being boring. The more uneventful a film was, the more day-to-day the dialogue choices, the more we celebrated it. But what we were looking for was films where no real events happened and the dialogue circles the banal. I can think of no better moment in Tracks to summarize this than the conversation about chicken skin.
You're not going to get any protein.
I'm not a vegetarian. I just feel sorry for the chicken.
Well, regardless, you seem like a vegetarian because if you
Jack.
Gene, nice to see you. You see, if you don't eat real meat, then you're going to get a lot of trouble
I
later
know
on.
all this.
Well, I saw an educational film over in Lam about chickens, and if you eat the skin, it's very bad for you.
I happen to like the skin.
Yeah, it's bad for you though. It doesn't digest. If you, yeah, it's true. And like but it's the best meat for you if you don't eat the skin.
Yeah, but it's not.
So you skin the chicken. Well, you understand now.
Excuse me. What I'm trying to say to you, it's not a matter of eating the skin or eating the inside. If it gives you pleasure, you should do it.
Which isn't to say that nothing happens in Tracks, because that's not true. A lot of things happen, although it's also possible that absolutely nothing happens and that everything is just in Dennis Hopper's head. But anyway. Scenes stop and start and get interrupted by other scenes, and then we seem to go back to scenes that happened earlier in the film. Sometimes people seem to move from one part of the train to another, or maybe they were never there in the first place. It is very much a product of its time, and the kind of film that you just don't get anymore. You may have never even heard of it before, but look at all these quotes from reputable sources. Not only is the fractured narrative something you don't get anymore, but the film was shot on actual Amtrak passenger trains without any permission at all. Jaglom and the cast and crew would regularly be ejected from the train and have to wait for the next one and start all over again. Imagine making a film like that these days. For those who have seen Tracks, you might be thinking, this is an inappropriate film to watch with a parent, and all I can say is, I was an edgy teen. Really, any film was okay to watch with mum. That is, until we watched Bad Lieutenant together. Man, that was a bad choice. A line was crossed that day. I think you all know which scene I'm talking about. Anyway, worth mentioning that Dennis Hopper looks very different in this film from how you would have previously seen him. I personally found it quite jarring to see him so clean cut and in the soldier's uniform. I can only imagine how it felt in 1976 for people to see counterculture icon Dennis Hopper playing a kind of pillar of society, if falling apart a little bit. It's also fun seeing Dennis Hopper and Dean Stockwell on screen together in Tracks. They were, as I'm sure you know, besties in real life, and you can really tell.
Put them together on trains, going across the country back and forth, back and forth. One thing that sticks out in my mind, or maybe it's my soul. I knew there was a reason I liked you. Yeah, right. A couple of runaways.
10 years later, they would share the screen again in Blue Velvet as Frank and Ben. Side note, there just aren't enough good Bens in cinema.
Hey, we love Ben.
We love Ben.
Here's the Ben.
Here's the Ben.
Hey, neighbor. Here's to Ben.
Here's to Ben.
Be polite.
Here's to Ben.
And sure, one of the reasons I love Tracks might be because I do love train movies in general. If you set your film on a train, chances are I'm going to watch it. Maybe it's the sound they make. Maybe it's the way train tracks resemble a piece of celluloid. I don't know. But I do know that I'm oddly drawn to films set on trains. And second fun side note, this shot from the General was, for many years, the most expensive shot in cinema. They blew up a real bridge with a real train. That train just sat in the river until World War II when it was finally harvested for scrap. But really, my feelings about Tracks are wrapped up in something that's difficult to show. A brief period where my mother and I were very close. Dark, cold, quiet mornings before the day had really begun, spent quietly talking about everything and nothing while a series of unusual films played out on the TV. Looking back on it, she was most likely going through some kind of unrest, which was probably difficult to deal with, and I hope that our mornings together helped in some way. I don't have any record for what we spoke about, but I know that it happened, and I know that it was all too brief. By 1993, I was living alone, and by 1998, August 10th, she was dead. But in 1992, for a brief, shimmering moment, things were good. And Tracks is one of the few mementos I have of this time period, which makes it pretty special. You might even call it a memento. And if we're calling it a memento, I'd like to quote Joan Didion talking about mementos in her book Blue Nights, where she says, "In theory, these mementos serve to bring back the moment. In fact, they serve only to make clear how inadequately I appreciated the moment when it was here." And she's not wrong. I would do anything to have access to just one of the conversations about everything and nothing that my mother and I had together back then, but they're all gone, slate wiped clean. Instead, all I have is the record of the banal, circular conversations that we used to watch together. Tracks is a film pretty much forgotten by film history that covers a very ephemeral period in the history of the United States, a brief flicker of a way of thinking and working that is lost to us now. Tracks also, for me, evokes a brief, unusual time period in my own life and that of the people around me that flickered into existence all too briefly. Doesn't get much more special than that. I must have listened to my mother repeat the chicken skin dialogue scene from Tracks 100 times to countless people. And, like Kurt Vonnegut said, enjoy the little things in life, because one day you'll look back and realize they were the big things. We never know what's going to happen, and we never know what's going to disappear without a trace, or what's going to stay with us. So appreciate everything while it's happening. Pay attention, because one day all you'll have is memories, if you're one of the lucky ones.
Going got rough out there. Think of the strangest things.
Like what?
Like child things. Did you ever do that?
I'll be a child. Think of strange things. You better believe it.